All right, cool. All right, how's everybody doing? Hey, that's pretty good. Well, this is a very cool progression because we just talked about a lot of the challenges with investment in the space right now, and really, especially in the content industry, if there's kind of a white knight that's helping creators who couldn't otherwise really be affording to create some of these cool projects and investing heavily, it's Oculus. And Yelena, like you've been working on experiences at Oculus for the past few years. What are some of the takeaways that what's it going to take for the VR industry to move into some of these non-gaming areas?
Yeah, first of all, it's great to be here. UCLA was where I went to school, so it's great to be back. Yay! Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've been at Oculus for 3 years. We're still in these early days. I don't want to get that wrong. But we learned a lot over the past few years. I think I first started at a story studio, and we started learning little lessons. One of the first projects I worked with was Henry, which was the first original project to win an Emmy, and it's a great introduction. We learned something about intimacy, Henry looking at your eyes, and I feel like we've gone so much farther since then. We're focusing a lot more on more highly interactive content and marrying concepts that we're understanding from gaming into more narrative approaches. So instead of, for my team, instead of shooters and strategy, how do we use these mechanics of understanding how our body works, natural, intuitive mechanics, to create pieces that people actually want to come back to, that people actually enjoy, and don't feel like they are playing a game necessarily. So we're marrying that knowledge also with the form factors. I think a few people have mentioned Quest, which is something we're super excited about. So it's not just the content, it's also the technology that's coming and making it easier. And a lot of technology is also working just to make things much more intuitive.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of how we're approaching content being more compelling, more intuitive, more interactive, more emotional, with the form factors and the hardware.
Okay. And it's interesting because even something like a very mature platform like iOS or something, like the App Store there, it feels like there's gaming, and then there are all these kind of random things that perform like the non-gaming areas. Like when you think of experiences, what do you think of, what fits in that bucket?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think that continuously changes,
okay.
Right?
What are you excited about specifically, in the experiences category right now, you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends what industry you're coming from. You use different words. I think gaming also covers something very broad. I think you can have explorative narrative gaming, like Gone Home did. Journey was a big thing for people. It created more emotional connections. So we could consider it a game, depending on how you look at it. The thing I'm really interested in is how we approach experiences that, like I mentioned, have very more natural, intuitive interactions versus necessarily a lot of button pressing to it.
Okay. Do you do a lot of work with education projects?
We're exploring education. Okay. We're not doing anything necessarily right now that's purely for the classroom. Or my team isn't, but the company is doing a lot.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. I mean, we're in LA. Hollywood is here. I think a year or two ago, maybe a lot of the studios were really looking in, being like, oh God, are we going to miss VR? There's this opportunity to fully immerse all these people in it. Now, I think some studios have played with it and maybe are just like, well, not right now. Is there any concern on your part that those people kind of spent their excitement already, and it's going to be a lot harder to convince them to come back and build stuff?
Well, I think the approach that a lot of studios took to VR was having their marketing departments do something.
Okay, yeah.
Because marketing departments of studios are the ones that are able to be more experimental. And I think it's studios taking more of a chance of doing projects alongside their IP. That something that we're doing, we just announced at Oculus Connect that we're launching with Quest as a project with Star Wars called Vader Immortal, which we're super excited about. And that's not marketing for a film. It's actually creating a deeper, richer experience that people want to be in. Films are really good. The way films are crafted are really, really good. We don't need to recreate just a portion of that for VR.
Yeah.
But it's important to take these familiar items from films that people connect with. So if you have a character that you love, it creates a familiarity where VR for some people can be slightly foreign. So take something from your film or from your IP that you know people love and put it into an experience in VR that people are actually going to really enjoy. Because if you read this book around called Hitmakers, the foundation of it is basically that you need something familiar and you need something novel.
Okay.
So how are we continuing to marry those? When we think about VR, everyone wants to keep on like pushing the limits of how far you could go.
Sure.
But sometimes the most successful things are actually pretty simple in their interactions.
Like what? What are some cool things that have been released that have been projects of Oculus lately that you've been excited about?
Well, something that wasn't ours, but just an example of simple interaction that people love was Job Simulator.
Yeah.
You know, and it's I gave this talk at Oculus Connect recently about embodiment and what makes us feel like something's ours, what makes us connect with an object. And there's this reality. Our Facebook Reality Labs research talks about something called object believability, and we really believe that we're picking up an object if it's something that we recognize that we've done in the real world. And the hard part about VR is that we're actually holding controllers in our hands. So how do you make your brain believe that you're actually picking up those objects? And people have approached it in different ways. So like Job Simulator, you have big hands and you press like really, really big buttons. And there's something very, very rewarding about that. Same thing with something like Beat Saber. Then there's a game that the studios team did called Lone Echo, which they put a lot of effort into how the hands like formed themselves around objects. And so because you're seeing your hands actually shift in the way that they should in real life, your brain believes that, and that becomes super, super rewarding. And so a lot of the projects we're creating we're still experimenting. Like, we still don't know a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But we're going all the way from kind of fully interactive to still slightly linear. But there's things that are super rewarding. Like, we had 5 projects at Sundance this last year. One of them that's getting a lot of attention right now is Spheres, which is really beautiful. It has super light interactivity. Your hands kind of become orbs, but it still has a linear process to it. So there's not a magic formula to it. Everything's just about the intent that you want to create.
Okay.
And then all the tools that you use for VR are meant to push forward that intent.
Gotcha. And one of the things that I like so much about covering the VR industry is that it's a lot of creators and a lot of game developers who are coming at it with a lot of just intense curiosity. No one's coming to VR being like, I'm going to get so rich building this game. Like, it just like, people are like, really intrigued by the possibilities of what they can push on interface and like all that stuff. Nevertheless, Oculus still is, investing more than you've invested into a lot of these experiences. But over the past few years, has there been any kind of realizations about commercial viability for like young studios and young creators?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I first started, especially at Story Studio, we made shorter experiences, like linear shorter experiences that were 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a little bit more. And people watch them, but then is there a reason for them to come in and watch it again? So we've been thinking a lot more about experiences that make people want to continue coming back, and what can you do to make something more replayable. I think there's still a space for shorter linear content, and we've seen that. Like Dear Angelica, for instance, was the project that we worked on that I think is just beautiful, and there's these projects that continue to elevate the craft and elevate the form of VR, and I think also to inspire people. And I think there's also great outlets for that when it comes to location-based entertainment and being able to create a showing where short content works.
Yeah.
But when you think about in-home and for consumer, you really have to think about something that gets people to want to stay in there a little bit longer, gets people to want to continue coming back, and that can come in a variety of forms. Interactivity that you can approach it with, and also social VR.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from investors I've chatted with, like location-based seems to be a very like hot content area. Does that kind of like a little bit sit at odds with Oculus's goals of having everybody have a headset at home?
No, I don't think so. I think the reality right now is that a lot of people who are buying headsets, more specifically Rift, are going to be people who play a lot of games, because that makes a lot of sense, except for Go, which really, really broadened our audience, which is super exciting. we think of LBEs as fully additive because it's a place where people can come and discover VR and discover what you can do, because I think we all know that VR is a very show don't tell medium, and then once you have an experience that got you really excited, then you know, versus hearing about it on the news, or it's really hard to market VR. I think we've seen some really great mixed reality videos recently that get people excited and want to be in that world too, but the reality is hard. And so what gets you to go to a place? It's an experience that you go with your friends to a location.
Yeah.
My interest is figuring out, and I haven't seen this done yet, and something I've been thinking about is what's that meaningful connection between live and in-home, where it doesn't feel like the LBE version is just a marketing version of something that you can have a deeper experience, but how can you create touch points where it feels like it's more circular, where you can do part of it that's in-home, and then there's some sort of persistence that brings it into the LBE.
Yeah.
It's not a competition at all. I feel like as much stuff that's out there and as much stuff that people realize how interesting and how powerful an experience can be, the better for the industry and the better for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what's powerful about LBE is that like, you know, you really feel transported to the location, but there's also like such heavy interactivity. And when I think about, you know, a lot of people who like feel like they've tried VR, but maybe they just had a Google Cardboard experience or something, or like, you know, maybe it was an early Gear VR thing, like, if they're seeing 360 video, it really doesn't feel interactive, and it also doesn't really transport you. Like, I know that people have been a little wary to bash 360 video just because there's, you know, YouTube has a ton of content, Facebook Watch, there's like, it's the only easy way to create anything for VR for the most part. But like, is there really a future for 360 video, you think?
I think there is. I think we've seen some incredible 360 videos. I think it was Paul from Felix and Paul said that we'll probably first see the Citizen Kane of VR in a 360 video than we will in interactivity.
Okay, they want to build it.
And they'll probably make it. But it's not as, you don't get that same feeling. When you're embodied and you have interactivity and you can walk around and you feel like you're an important part of the piece, there is nothing that compares with that I think 360 video can do. But what I am excited about is I think media is such an important part in all of our lives. It's what we capture our memories in. It's what we do when we share pictures with each other. I'm really interested in how 360 video and media generally is going to fit into our virtual world as well. I see a mix between that happening.
Okay. Like live action in general, are there any like new technologies that you think are really going to like be able to bring like real people and real situations into VR, or is most stuff going to be run off game engines?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work being done right now in holocapture technology. Metastage just opened in LA, and they use Microsoft holocapture. We used holocapture in our Blade Runner experience. And you can do some really good capture of people. What I really love is bringing capture and mixing it with CG so you can have more flexibility of it. Trying to capture something fully live that you can walk around in right now is still really hard. We also announced a new camera called Manifold, which is a bunch of red cameras that you can do some volumetric. But it's hard because I think when you go into a VR world that you can actually walk around in, you expect people them to pay attention to you.
Yeah.
So if you have something that you've live captured and you can walk around and they don't react to you in any way, that can break the immersion. So you have to think about what's the creative conceit that you should put forward that that makes sense for that.
Yeah.
Like a theater, you know, you're watching theater, and you can do some really great things, and people get really, really creative for it. But I'm going to be super excited once we can take live capture technology. It can actually either become live of us being in the space with other people, or that you can take the live capture and rig it and make it interactive, and that's all going to be possible.
Do you expect just, you know, right now you have Rift and Go, a little bit of Gear VR, like once you put Quest into that mix, do you kind of expect that, you know, there's just going to be a little bit of a shift away from 360 fixed 3DOF experiences, and, you know, I would imagine just creators really want to use like their hands and be able to move around environments. Like, do you kind of think that you'll be moving a little bit away from 360 dome stuff?
Well, I think for purposes of our team, because everything that was created in 360 video and everything for gear transferred over into Go, there's plenty of content. Quest, we have to create new content for, so it's important for us, and we see ourselves as the place to help seed the ecosystem, and that's why we're putting a lot of funding towards experiences that are a broad range, from really large IP to really cool, quirky, interactive stuff that I personally really love, and hope we can, continue doing. But as we're putting this out, we need more content for it. So that's part of the reasons. But generally and personally speaking, I just don't think anything compares to being able to really move around. And with Quest coming, there's something really, I don't know how many people have tried it. We had it at Oculus Connect. But when you put on the headset and you're not tethered to anything and you can walk really far. We don't recommend you walk really far. And it's this endless virtual world. The feeling you get is pretty powerful. And I don't think it has to do always with the content, because you can have the same kind of Rift content, even though it has to be changed for a mobile chipset for Quest. It's just you're not distracted. You're not scared of going outside and the cord breaking, or you're not scared of turning 360 degrees and having the cord wrap around. And then it gets us more towards that magical VR word presence.
Yeah.
Because we're not distracted.
Yeah, like, as you're saying, like, seeding this ecosystem, kind of something we've been touching on with a few of the panels today. Like, you have this opportunity, especially with Oculus, like, investing in types of content that you see as enthralling. Like, how do you look at this and think, like, how can we make this a more inclusive, accepting environment for people who are diving into this content? So it's not just, I buy a Quest and there are a bunch of shooters. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I really believe that in order to do that, you need a diverse set of creators. And that's really important for our team. And at Oculus, we've been doing a lot around that. We have a bunch of programs like Oculus Launchpad, which brings 100 diverse creators to Oculus for a boot camp and puts them up for grants for creating projects. And I've run into people, I've spoken at all three of them, and I run into people a couple years later, and they talk about how that changed the course of their life. We have our VR for Good program, which makes social impact content. I also worked with a diversity manager for the Diverse Filmmakers Fund. So Spheres actually came out of that too, where we funded projects specifically from diverse creators. So it's not saying that people only make content for people like them, but it's saying that it's important to recognize, I think, what Kamal Sinclair for Sundance calls our blind spots.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. I think, the entire experience is focused because a lot of these big VR companies, they wanna push up and find like the gaming customers because they want to get the headsets out there, and then it just makes it a very interesting an interesting problem to solve. So it's cool that Oculus is investing in this type of content. Hey, it was great having you on stage, and thanks so much for coming to the event.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome.